The headlights of the battered sedan could only pierce through the downpour for a few yards. Chris gripped the steering wheel, his eyes burning from 8 consecutive hours of driving across the desolate plains of Nebraska. The gas needle had been hovering below empty for far too long. In this lonely valley, cell service was nothing but a hopeless gray X. Just as Chris thought he'd have to spend the night on the shoulder, a flickering neon light emerged from behind the towering cornrows. The motel looked like it had been ripped straight out of a 1970s slasher flick. Peeling paint, a long row of rooms sinking into the shadows. Chris parked, dashed through the rain and burst into the front office. Standing behind the counter was a tall, gaunt man in an ill-fitting suit. He had an unnaturally long face and eyes that never seemed to blink. He pushed a tattered ledger toward Chris.
$30 a night. Cash only,
the man said, his voice as dry as sand. As Chris reached for the key to room 104, the manager suddenly gripped his wrist. His eyes bored into Chris's.
Listen to me, friend. This place is old. The walls are thin. If you hear knocking from the room next door, never, ever knock back. It's just a neighbor. He likes to play games. Don't let him pull you into a sport.
Chris nodded dismissively, thinking the man was just delusional from living in the middle of nowhere. Room 104 smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap bleach. Chris washed up quickly and climbed onto the creaky bed. He was just drifting off when a sound erupted right next to his ear. It came from the left wall, the one shared with room 105. It was slow, steady, like the ticking of a clock. Chris sighed, remembering the manager's warning. He pulled the blanket over his head. But the tapping began to move. It wasn't staying in one spot anymore. It migrated along the wall, crawled past the front door, and circled around to the right side wall. It felt as if someone was pacing around his room on the other side of the wood, rapping their knuckles incessantly against the grain.
Come on, man,
Chris muttered. Exhaustion was curdling into anger. The tapping stopped directly behind the large mirror facing the bed. Chris stood up and leaned in close to the glass. He saw nothing but his own weary reflection. A knock so violent it made the mirror vibrate. Losing his cool, Chris balled up his fist and hammered back 3 times hard.
go away and let me sleep,
He yelled. The world plunged into absolute silence. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. It was so quiet Chris could hear the blood rushing through his own eardrums. Under the front door, a small white slip of paper was slowly pushed through the crack. Chris, trembling, picked it up. On it was a single line written in a jagged, distorted hand.
Thank you for answering. Do I have permission to enter now?
A chill shot down Chris's spine. He lunged for the door and slammed the deadbolt home. He leaned in to look through the peephole to see who was harassing him. But instead of the dark hallway, he saw only a deep, solid red. A thick, crimson hue that seemed to have depth.
Who's there? Is that you, manager?
Chris asked, his voice cracking. The red color suddenly vanished, revealing the empty hallway. Chris realized with sudden, gut-wrenching horror, what he had just seen wasn't a red cloth. It was a bloodshot eyeball pressed so close to the other side of the peephole that it filled his entire field of vision. The thing had been watching him before he even looked. Chris backed away, tripping over the mirror. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. Looking into the shards, he noticed something impossible. Behind the silver backing of the mirror wasn't a brick wall, but a hollow, pitch-black void. He caught a glimpse of his own back in a fragment of glass on the floor. On his white t-shirt, 3 long bleeding claw marks were seeping through, in the exact spot where he had knocked back on the wall. Suddenly, the door to room 104 swung open. It wasn't broken down. The manager had unlocked it with a master key. He stood there, holding an old camera and a travel log. He looked at Chris with pity.
I warned you, Chris. This motel doesn't live on rent money. It lives on responses.
The manager stepped back, pointing toward room 105, which was now standing wide open. Chris looked in. Room 105 was empty of furniture, save for a skeletal, emaciated man whose eyes had been sewn shut with black thread. The man was kneeling on the floor, his hands frantically drumming against the wall.
The one who wins the game of knocks gets to leave.
The manager whispered.
The man in 105 has been knocking for 20 years. And tonight, you answered him. You accepted the trade.
The thing in room 105 suddenly stood up with inhuman speed. He bolted into the hallway and vanished into the rain with a bone-chilling laugh. The manager closed the door to room 104, locking it from the outside. The next morning the storm cleared. Another car, low on fuel, pulled into the dusty rows. A young woman walked into the office. The manager pushed the ledger forward, that same strange smile on his face. He handed her the key to room 105.
Sleep well,
he said.
But if you hear a knocking from room 104, whatever you do, never knock back.
On the other side of the wall in room 104, Chris sat slumped on the floor, his eyes beginning to turn a deep, solid red. He raised his hand and in a gesture of pure desperation, he tapped against the wood.
Hoping for a response. Hoping for a replacement.